think we get the Golden Cup for being right on time. Okay. I will start the questions, and then we will move from there to Mr. Meeks. Mr. Bartos, you're the first time, you have used for the first time the words that I know would eventually emerge. The words, the new Cold War. I don't know who wants it, but somebody wants war with Russia. I mean, it's more than just a fear of Russia. Somebody wants there to be a new Cold War. I have spent a considerable part of my life trying to defeat the Soviet Union, and both in the White House and out in the field against Soviet troops, etc. And I started anyway, when I was a teenager. But the bottom line is that we don't want a Cold War. The American people don't want a Cold War, yet we have an unrelenting hostility that says that we have to watch out for even Russia's influence on a region. I see no reason why Russia shouldn't be able to sell energy to any country that it wants to, or if any country. I don't see that as a hostile act to the United States. Let me just note, if we're going to solve this, we got to do this. We got to move forward in a positive way, rather than looking at this as some kind of we're going to do this so to screw the Russians. That's not going to bring about a better world. But we know something needs to be done in the Balkans because it's not working. And just like you said, Doctor, that when the EU took over, basically some of the major leadership from the United States, things started going haywire. And it's continued to go haywire for the last 10 years. So with that, why not make a different kind of approach rather than having us, as I say, I think that what's motivating us is there are some very powerful moneyed interests in Europe that want to see the Balkans towing the line that they dictate. And what about having a new, now put this up for the panel, what about encouraging these countries to form a new Southern European Economic Union together? And anything beside, they can't call it Yugoslavia, they can call it whatever else they want to call it. The bottom line is that if you had a open borders type of free trade with these countries, it would be a tremendous benefit to them. So instead of us pushing to try to get them to do whatever the German banks tell them to do in order to get into the EU, maybe we should be telling them, why don't you start working together and opening up trade between each other and tearing down these boundaries, economic boundaries? What do you think about that? Please, 1 minute. Start with Bartos. Start with the doc. Start with Joe in the middle, and then go to the right. Go ahead.
It's not going to work, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Let me tell you why. You've got such political corruption now in Albania, in Macedonia, in Kosovo, in Serbia. The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. The people are not being served by these governments. I don't know what's going to happen after the elections in Kosovo and in Albania. Nobody agrees on anything, apparently. I think that it's time for the U.S. to realize that by abandoning the Balkans to the European Union, we have failed. Oakwood Agreement was guaranteed by the U.S. and by the European Union. It did nothing. It's worse now than it was before. So how could we look at normal ways of thinking to create an economy in Southeast Europe?
Got it, Joe, but now tell us your 30-second answer of your plan.
The plan,
Joe's plan.
The plan is, and I hate to see these cuts for the State Department, it doesn't make any sense. We need to be much more engaged than we are. We're fooling ourselves.
What are we pushing for?
Well, for instance, get Oakwood back on. It was signed off, but let's have an implementation framework that we are monitoring very closely. Not saying, well, let the European Union do it and we'll figure out what goes on later. So we got to take baby steps. This is not going to be solved very fast. The racism that exists from the Slavs to the Albanians is so great because of the paper I just mentioned. We got to get rid of the Albanians at all costs. Basically, that's what that paper says. And that's one of the reasons why Milosevic went to The Hague, because we brought him to The Hague and made sure that paper was put on the record so that they knew Albanians could never coexist in Serbia and in Kosovo with this kind of thinking. And now Gruevski's doing it in Macedonia. So I don't know what the answer is.
Okay, well, let's go to the doctor who may know the answer.
Mr. Chairman, I won't claim to know the answer. What I'll tell you is that it's worth a look. I think we have not maximized the economic advantages of peace after
And cooperation.
1995 and 2001. These countries do have good access to European markets through their stabilization and association agreements. I think they have quite a bit of access to each other's markets as well. But that's a proposition that would have to be studied in some depth and with some care, and I frankly haven't seen such a study. Maybe, Gordon, you know.
Thank you, Dr. Bardos.
Well, it's a very commonsensical and logical idea. As a matter of fact, the current Serbian Prime Minister, soon to be President Vučić, proposed something like that a few weeks ago, a kind of a Balkan common market. The problem with it, I think a lot of the problem with it right now is political. Emotions are still too raw among the different peoples in the region. Some people think that Serbia would wind up dominating such an arrangement, and they don't want to see that happening. Some people think it might be like a recreation of the old Yugoslavia, and they don't want to see that happening. I think there is something in place, and unfortunately I'm not an economist, so I don't know this in great detail. There is something called CEFTA, the Central European Free Trade Association, or agreement. I can't remember all the specifics of it. Something like that does exist. I think a good step in this direction, though, would be to start promoting what might be politically possible, is to start promoting as many bilateral free trade agreements as possible. Start opening up the markets that way. So maybe, obviously, it might not work between Serbia and Kosovo now, or between Kosovo and Macedonia, but you could see something, you could see trade freeing up, considerably between Serbia and Bosnia, for instance, or between Croatia and Bosnia, and various permutations like that.
We know something has to happen. The bottom line is you have people suffering there economically. You have young people who have no hope of jobs.
Right.
You got people who when people lose hope, they turn to extremism. And the last thing we need for whether they're Christian extremists or whether they're Muslim extremists, we do not need them turning to their religion and becoming extremist and then joining in with others to commit acts of violence. And that's a real, not only a possibility, it's already been in your testimony, you mentioned that's being seen now for the, not first time, but we're easing into a situation where that didn't exist, and now it's becoming a part of the reality of the Balkans. So we need to get moving, we need to be engaged, and I will have a very short closing statement, but Mr. Meeks has the floor now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, again. Interesting dialogue. Let me just pick up where some are talking about, and I know I'll start with Dr. Sewer. In March of 2017, this year, the leaders of Albania, Bosnia, Kosovo, Macedonia, Montenegro, and Serbia met. They all got together to, I guess, reignite this regional cooperation and reaffirm their shared interest in eventually joining the EU if possible, and putting forward a plan for the Western Balkans. And I think they planned another meeting sometime this year. I think it's July. So my question to you is, do we, the United States of America, should we have an interest in these meetings continuing? Are these meetings a positive step that may lead to something or towards mutual cooperation? And if you think it is, how do you think the United States should support such meetings?
Mr. Meeks, I'm under the impression the United States has given ample support to these kinds of regional arrangements, which exist among the defense ministers, among the interior ministers, and also for regional, especially regional economic and infrastructure cooperation. There's very little progress on regional infrastructure. The EU has promised a lot of money, but hasn't really started the digging yet. I'm under the impression that we've provided a lot of diplomatic support to those efforts. We don't have the kind of bilateral assistance money that helps much in this game. We frankly have been out of the infrastructure game for the most part. We need to see the World Bank in particular, but also the European Union picking up the bills for roads, for railroads, for airports in the region. But I think it would have been better to ask Mr. Yee, but I think he would say, look, we've been fully supportive of all the regional cooperative arrangements, and they are quite successful, I must say. These guys meet all the time.
Mr. Bartels, you mentioned that the new Serbian president talked about having a Western Balkans custom union or something of that nature. I think you mentioned that. Is that a good idea? Was that something that would help some of the economic instability in the region? Is that a step in the right direction? And what influence do you think that the new president of Serbia will have in the region?
It is a very good idea. It's, you know, as I said, very commonsensical, very logical. It would reduce tariff barriers, make transporting goods easier, moving labor, capital, and so forth. It could be a spur to economic development and activity in the region and so forth. But again, you know, the problem right now at this point is political. I think there's too much, as I said, the emotions are too raw right now. People are still very leery about anything that looks like recreating Yugoslavia. And there's also the fear that this might be, the Europeans might be offering this in place of European Union membership. So that's what a lot of people in the region are afraid of too, that they're not, you know, okay, the Europeans have given up on taking the Western Balkans into the EU, so this is kind of our consolation prize. So you're getting a little kind of political and emotional pushback because of that as well. But it's a very good idea.
You agree?
When you mention Vucic and Dacic, you're talking about the people that were weaned by Slobodan Milosevic, the biggest racist you're ever going to find. What he did, he got convicted. Well, he died in his prison cell because he didn't take his heart medicine, but he's about to get convicted for war crimes and genocide against the Albanian people. What did Vucic and Dacic say recently? That they signaled that they will definitely come in to support Gruevski, the guy that did this. And what they want is an ethnic thing. They want an excuse. They want to see the Albanians out so badly that they want to see an ethnic, even though it's a political conflict and an economic problem, they want it to be inter-ethnic because that would draw Russia in, and then Russia would probably support, obviously, the Serbs, and it would be, again, a war against the Albanians. So we got to be very careful here.
I mean, my last question, I see I'm just about out of time, and I know we got votes getting ready to come up. My other concern is Bosnia, and its current troubles with its ethnic minority population, of course, and the corruption and its relatively weak central government. How can we encourage others in the region, the regional actors, to better cooperate and to support an independent Bosnia? I think that is real important. Is there something that we can do? Is there a role that we can play to help make that happen? Dr. Sewell?
Yes, in short. We should be encouraging Belgrade to do what it has any number of times said it would do, which was to be supportive of a sovereign and integral Bosnia. But much more is needed because we have in Republika Srpska somebody who has promised an independence referendum, who clearly is in violation of the Dayton Accords. We've designated him under our Treasury regulations. And we need to do more to ensure that he is not a dominant political force in Bosnia, if Bosnia is going to stay in one piece. The way to do that, in my view, is to talk with the Europeans. I mean, the Europeans have to be willing. When we designate somebody using the Treasury's powers, the Europeans, more often than not, do not follow suit. They use those tools much more sparingly than we do, and that has to do with politics inside the EU. We need to be getting them to follow suit. I think preventing some of Mr. Dodik himself and some of his people from traveling in and using the financial system of the European Union would be a very serious sanction. So I think Serbia is ready in many ways to do the right things, but it's Europe that hasn't done as much of the right things that I would like to see. Frankly, Bosnia is a problem because of the constitution that we wrote for the country and that they wanted for the country. And it's very hard to change that constitution, but I have no doubt but that we will be having problems with Bosnia until it at least has a clause in its constitution that says the central government has the authority, all the authority it needs to negotiate and implement the rules of the European Union. That would be my simple solution in Bosnia.
Thank you, and I want to thank all of you for your testimony. I'm simply out of time here, and I know that we have votes coming up, and the chairman wants to do his closing
Remarks.
remarks.
There you are. And,
I wanted to make a comment on that. Can I make just one quick comment, please?
oh, yeah,
on
sure,
that?
Joe.
You can't trust Serbia. Mr. Dodic is taking his orders from Belgrade. Serbia wants, at some point, not only to have influence in Serbia, but to make it part of Serbia. The same thing that's going on in northern Kosovo. So, and listen, Serbia still has not recognized Kosovo. They want to become part of the European Union. Part of that was good neighborliness. What good neighbors are Serbs to Kosovo and Albanians? They've gotten worse, not better. So you got to watch out for Serbia. They're the bad man in the neighborhood, and you're not going to get them to change anything because the issue is not Greater Albania, it's Greater Serbia.
Last bit of testimony, watch out for Serbia.
Yes.
Look,
Am I right? Ask the Albanians.
look, my theory is watch out for bad guys.
Well,
Listen, there are good people in every one of those ethnic groups that you're talking about.
Right.
There are good people
You're right.
who are Serbs, and there are good people who are Albanians. There are good Muslims. There are good Christians. And what we have to try to do, if there's going to be peace, is try to seek out the good people in all of those communities and say it's about time we get moving. We have stagnated enough. We have 20 years of going nowhere because we're only concerned about the bad guys over there, and we're there with all the bad guys. The fact is that there are bad guys, as I say, in all of these countries, but there are good guys, and the good guys, I think, are capable of working together if the United States provides leadership. And we have to provide leadership with people knowing that we care about things, but like that, when you have people being beaten up, like we care about that, and we have to be forceful to let people on the other side know that is unacceptable. And we also have to have some creative approaches. And let me just say that this idea, I don't know, every time I've gone down to the Balkans, they seem to have the same concept. Let's get a part. We got to get part of the EU, and we got to be part of NATO. Well, this is like, I really got to get to the Titanic before it sails. And in fact, the Titanic's already sailed. I'll pay you to put me on the Titanic. Get me a rowboat or get me a motorboat and get me on that ship. The EU is the past, and it's not working. If we can come up with some positive solutions and have some energy and some excitement about really economic coalitions that work, let's look back when things were really bad, and I can tell you there are really bad guys in Germany in World War II, and we came along with the Marshall Plan. I've read about the Marshall Plan. I haven't, probably some of you, probably the doctors a lot more than me, but the Marshall Plan, what did it do? What was the most important thing it did? Is it made sure that all of these inhibitors to trade between their countries, the European countries that had been at war with each other, they got rid of those impediments. And they encouraged people to economically cooperate. That's what made the European situation better in the first place. None of that's been tried in the Balkans. None of it's been tried in the Balkans because, and I will tell you, Joe, if a lot of Serbs were bad, there are a lot of Germans that were bad at that time, and we made sure that we integrated them and into a situation. And now, of course, they're calling the shots on the World Bank and a lot of other places.
Mr. Chairman, you made a very good point. The people are good. It's the governments that are bad. How do
Okay.
you deal with
All
these
right.
corrupt governments? That's
Well,
the problem.
It's up to us to make sure that we're encouraging the good people, and I don't know, we do respect democracy, we do respect who gets elected and the rules of the game, and let me just say, this committee will continue we paid a lot of attention to the Baltics, and as I say, as we got in the Baltics, I did not find the Russian military aggression everybody was talking about. And we spent a lot of time in this committee going over Turkey, and Turkey has turned out to be the disaster that we thought it might be. This subcommittee has held numerous hearings with numerous ideas going into this, and I can assure you that now we're going to be focusing on the Balkans to try to come up with ways that we can actually work with people there, the good people there in all of these countries, try to find some cooperation, some areas of cooperation, and make it happen. And so with that said, you can count on, this is just the second of a hearing, of a series. We are going on there will be a CODEL, a major CODEL, just to the Balkans, probably in August. And we will visit these areas, and we would really be happy to any advice that any of you could give us as to who we would meet with there. With that said, I want to thank the witnesses and thank Mr. Meeks. Got a great good one again. And this committee is adjourned.
Thank you.